Hi, I'm Theo Stojanov, and I'm an instructional designer at McGill University. If you were to describe engagement, I'm sure that each of you would have a different version of what it means. It's not one thing. It's clear that engagement means something different to a physical education instructor or an art teacher than it does to a math professor, for instance. Yet, in many talks and papers, engagement is used without undue definition. And as someone whose main research tools include qualitative and discourse analysis, I place particular attention on keywords, how they're used and defined. And so I was curious to find out what some of the different meanings of the concept of engagement were in the literature and how it's measured in academic research intended to inform practice. Here are some categories that have been proposed as a way of narrowing down what can be measured in terms of engagement. We have effective engagement, which often indicates the level of involvement. For example, being interested in a topic and enjoying learning about it. There is also academic engagement, which means getting along with teachers, participating in class, time on task, not skipping classes, that sort of thing. There's behavioral engagement, which also draws on the idea of participation and includes extracurricular activities, staying focused, submitting assigned tasks, and following the instructor's instructions. Cognitive engagement refers to the thoughtfulness and willingness to exert the effort necessary to understand complex ideas and to master difficult topics or difficult skills. It involves attention, focus, and memory, and as well as creative thinking. It is what we most often associate with the idea of learning. Emotional engagement encompasses positive and negative reactions to teachers, classmates, and content. And finally, psychological engagement, that refers to the sense of belonging and building relationships with teachers and peers. Of these, affective, behavioral, and cognitive are the most frequently investigated ones. There are two further definitions that I would like to give before we go on. Engagement measurements can be internal to the subject, that includes cognitive and affective ones. They can also be external and observable, that is, performance metrics based on interactions with technology. For example, perceptible facial features, postures, gestures, speech, actions, time spent on task, and so on. The detection and measurement of the above categories then can be classified into three principal methods, as can be seen in this graph. So very briefly, what we have here is manual methods. They are the earliest, and they consist of observation, self-reporting, questionnaires, and focus groups, mostly qualitative in nature. These are also the least common when it comes to educational technology. Then we have semi-automatic. They involve the analysis of student performance based on length of posts, the time it takes to complete tasks, and generally the activity logged by the LMS. Finally, automatic is the most recent and relies on big data collection and the building of complex statistical models and that could combine log data from the LMS with various sensors such as wearables, microphones, and cameras. This last method brings us into the world of AI-mediated engagement analysis, and we can expect to see a lot more of that in the future. So I will give several examples of studies from academic papers, and I will follow each example with a commentary on how they relate to our project. A couple of words about the project. It was a set of courses on cybersecurity that involved asynchronous video, some individual and group assignments, a couple of cyber attack simulations, and peer assessment activities. The courses lead to a graduate certificate in cybersecurity offered by the School of Information Studies at McGill University. All of my examples about measurement are drawn from recent literature because I was interested in the current meanings associated with the concept of engagement in academic work and how those apply to our instructional design. Specifically, I was looking at research that involved media-rich online learning experiences. Our first example comes from a paper entitled Beyond Engagement: Learning from Students as Partners in Curriculum and Assessment. The authors here present a study in which students were involved as partners in the curriculum design. The SAP approach promotes active student engagement by involving students in the decision-making process and inviting them to contribute their perspectives and ideas. What was measured? The measurement criteria, or partnership, in other words, student participation in the creation of content, is believed to offer certain advantages such as empowerment and agency, improved collaboration, and more focus on the subject that students are now invited to be active stakeholders in rather than mere observers. There are also problems with this approach, the major one being the inherent power imbalance between students and instructors, who are simply not equal partners on a number of important levels. How is engagement measured here? The results of this qualitative study are mixed, and it appears that the authors learned more about how students self-organize in learning environments and online learning environments than the students did about the subjects that they were partnered in. Bringing this over to our case of the cybersecurity courses, our students also became involved in the creation of the course, but it was not done in a planned way. Our situation is what may more appropriately be called students as accidental partners, where students were involved in spotting and reporting errors such as typos or broken links, even going as far as suggesting improvements to the content itself. In many ways, our experience with students as accidental partners was similar to what is known in software as beta testing. It is almost worth considering using such a technique deliberately. A similar approach has been proposed in the world of art education, and it is known as glitch pedagogy. The idea is to take unforeseen errors, unexpected disruptions, and other ambiguities and turn them into learning tools. A potential use in the area of cybersecurity instruction, for instance, could involve the introduction of all kinds of planned inconsistencies and what gamers call Easter eggs into a course, motivating the students to pay closer attention and providing the rewards associated with learning and discovery. The next example comes from a study entitled Asynchronous Video and the Development of Instructor Social Presence and Student Engagement. The problem the authors here are confronted with is the rapidly growing enrollment in online learning, that is circa 2019 when the study was published, accompanied by an equally high attrition rates. For them, the question is how to keep students engaged so that they can achieve better outcomes and at the same time reduce the feelings of isolation that frequently accompany online learning. What was measured? Here, engagement takes on the form of instructor presence, or instructor social presence. For these researchers, instructor presence and social interaction between learners and instructors are the most important factors in student engagement. More specifically, they looked at two kinds of interactions, text-based and asynchronous video communications from the instructor, which were posted twice weekly. How was it measured? This was a quantitative study of online video engagement. The researchers measured the length of discussion forum posts as an indicator of engagement and used questionnaires to evaluate the feelings of social presence. Since they were trying to combat attrition or alienation, they reasoned that time spent on the discussion task prompted by video or text would indicate the potential for each one of those two modalities to improve engagement. What they found was that students responded significantly more to the text-based communication than the video-based one, although both methods elicited some form of response. My sense is that this is to be expected given the modality of communications and does not necessarily indicate engagement as a measure of cognitive involvement, but rather as a measure of time spent on task. And what I mean by this is that comments on video platforms tend to be a lot shorter than those on text-based ones, such as Goodreads, for instance, where a comment discussing a book could be as long as an entire essay, whereas a similar topic on a video platform would elicit a comment that is just a few lines long, and that does not necessarily indicate that there was lesser engagement with the video than there was with the text. Bringing this over to our cybersecurity project, our design was majorly influenced by the community of inquiry framework in which social presence is a defining characteristic. From the work of YouTube influencer, educator, and anthropologist Michael Wesch, we already knew that weekly posts of just a few minutes are hugely successful with students. These videos mention students' work, they offer comments, they offer encouragements where deserved or corrections where needed. However, the most important function they fulfill is not informational but social. We encouraged the instructors involved in our set of courses to produce such videos. But this mode of engagement is not yet well absorbed. There is a feeling of discomfort and resistance in spite of how easy it is to make these videos. Live synchronous office hours, however, served a similar purpose. Text-based communication is another modality that we used as well to reassure students that they're connected to a learning community and to an instructor for whom their individual successes matter. The next and last example comes from a paper entitled Engagement Detection in Online Learning from researchers at the Athabasca University in Alberta. This study brings us up to date with state-of-the-art approaches to measuring engagement. Here, again, the overriding concern was the retention of students in online environments. What was being measured? The authors of this meta-study chart a course towards an increased use of sensors, specifically cameras, which they hope will one day help to develop an AI that can detect perceived engagement, in a similar way that a teacher can perceive the engagement of students in a classroom. The implications are that just as a teacher readjusts their instructional methods based on perceived engagement, so will a system. Consequently, based on what it perceives, the system can adjust its instructional strategies to offer personalized instructional design, ensuring optimal learning experiences. How was engagement measured? Cameras record actions which are analyzed and then labeled by humans. Humans look at the video feed, they code the different facial expressions as bored, interested, neutral, confused, engaged, frustrated, and in this way they train the AI to recognize similar actions in the future. There are a number of potential advantages to this, namely the potential for personalized instruction, and this would take the idea of universal design to a completely new level by opening up the possibility of generating inclusive spaces and experiences that accommodate all kinds of diverse individuals of all kinds of abilities. There are also disadvantages. For instance, it is difficult to interpret facial expressions from one person to the next. It is difficult also to establish a correlation between what this method perceives as engaged and academic performance, because subjects who may appear disengaged may in fact do rather well in class. There's also a cultural issue. Engagement looks very different across cultures, age groups, and all sorts of demographic variables. Finally, although the authors of this study insist on specifying that computer vision is a non-intrusive method of engagement detection, they leave out the definition of what they mean by intrusive. And this can be problematic for those of us who may be of a more Foucauldian or privacy-conscious disposition, which suggests that simply being observed and watched is in itself a powerful form of intrusion with a long history that predates modern technologies. So how did we use the data at our disposal to attempt to assess or attempt to draw a picture of engagement based on the collected information? In our project, we used a number of tools besides the LMS. We used some third-party virtual lab providers, a custom-built video platform for streaming lectures, and several additional software add-ons. We discovered that we were severely under-equipped to deal with the data analytics. The tools at our disposal did not permit us to get a high-resolution impression of student engagement. The limited and very superficial access to the data analytics that we did have access to was a principal motivation behind today's presentation. Using or even accessing the core data collected by any one of these components that made up our course was very difficult or impossible. And the main reason for this is copyright, since the data they collect and the analytics that they generate are in most cases proprietary information. The LMS provides some basic information for each student or maybe for a particular video, but it was impossible to see the big picture, to view how all of these components work together across time and for different groups of students. We found that we got better and more rapid results by just using tried and tested methods of focus groups or questionnaires, and that gave us much more immediate and fairly accurate impressions of the kinds of engagements that students experienced or were looking for within the course. Sure, it is a much more low-resolution approach, but the simplicity of qualitative analysis, when well done, cannot be understated. So this has been a brief overview of some of the major directions in engagement detection and measurement in recent years. We saw that engagement is a multifaceted and complex construct. It can be discipline-specific, it can vary from culture to culture, and some aspects of it are easier to measure than others. With online learning, We are at the nexus of technology and student engagement. Yet, as researchers show, there is no guarantee of student engagement as a result of using technology. Tech can amplify, but cannot replace teaching or teacher engagement. And teacher engagement is a topic in its own right. We frequently speak of attrition rates, of student alienation, but we neglect to speak of instructor alienation. What is alienation in a more Frankfurt School kind of vein, particularly with a growing body of precariously employed temporary knowledge workers in education? As far as the future of engagement measurements goes, I mentioned that quantitative studies make up the majority of what is out there concerning ed tech. They can be highly informative in showing whether a certain instructional strategy or tool is more effective than another, but there remain many other student engagement indicators that are more difficult to measure this way. There is much more room to study the affective and cognitive domains of engagement, and while it is arguably more difficult to do so, measurements can take the form of well-designed surveys, ethnographic observations, and other forms of qualitative data that can help researchers formulate the less observable aspects of engagement, such as affect, emotion, and behavior. In some ways, describing what makes good engagement is akin to asking what makes a good movie or a good book. Engagement is the ingredient added to the exchange of information that brings it into the realm of unique experiences. We may think of engagement in terms of economies of scale, simply statistics and other methods. But for students, just like watching a good show or reading a novel, it is an individual and a very personal experience. I hope that this talk has managed to engage you at some level, and I thank you for watching.